On Primetime Politics tonight, another historic meeting between survivors of residential schools and Pope Francis, and reason for optimism that a papal apology is coming. I'll speak with former First Nations National Chief and school survivor Phil Fontaine and Manitoba Regional Chief Cindy Woodhouse about the historic meeting today. As the war rages in Ukraine, the federal government faces questions about its support for Ukrainian refugees. We'll put the questions to Immigration Minister Sean Fraser. And our panel of political commentators on carbon taxes, the upcoming budget, and more. But we'll begin tonight in Rome. More survivors of Canada's residential school system met with Pope Francis at the Vatican in Rome today, and an air of optimism surrounds the historic gathering. The First Nation delegation met with Pope Francis for 2 hours, twice the time the Pope had set aside. The survivors told their stories of abuse suffered at the hands of the Catholic-operated institutions. The survivor groups meeting with the Pope this week have been pressing the pontiff for an apology to be delivered in Canada on First Nations territory. And the First Nations delegation wants the return of First Nations traditional lands seized by the Church.
There is a significant role the Catholic Church can play in assisting in the return of our children by supporting the disclosure of records and documents in its possession. Access to all of the records and documents will help to identify our children and may bring closure and healing to the many families and communities whom for so long have grieved the loss of their loved ones without knowing the truth of what happened.
From the late 1800s to 1996, 150,000 Indigenous children were pulled from their families and forced to attend the residential schools, operated mostly by the Catholic Church. The schools were aimed at purging their language and culture and replacing it with the English language and the Christian belief system. There was widespread abuse and more than 4,000 deaths. The legacy of the schools has come under even closer scrutiny with the discovery of unmarked graves at former residential school sites. I'm joined now by two of the delegates at the meeting with the Pope today. Phil Fontaine, a former National Chief of the Assembly of First Nations. He is a survivor of the residential school system and was one of the first to speak out about the abuses he suffered. And Cindy Woodhouse is the AFN Regional Chief for Manitoba. Good to see you both. Thanks for taking time to speak with me today. Phil Fontaine, if I can, let me start with you. Tell me what happened in that meeting today. What was it like?
It was a good meeting. We had about 2 hours with the Holy Father, which was about an hour longer than planned. And so that gave us an opportunity to give a full presentation of the issues that are related directly and indirectly to the residential school issue. Mm-hmm. And it gave the Pope, the Holy Father, a real opportunity to learn about residential schools from a personal point of view. And by that I mean the presentations were from survivors. Our delegation was made up, I should point out, Peter, largely of residential school survivors. So, in my view, it was a very helpful conversation with the Holy Father.
Chief Woodhouse, the main ask, of course, is for an apology from the Pope to be delivered on Canadian soil, on First Nations territory. How did the Pope respond to the request?
Well, you know, Phil, our knowledge keeper that's on, Phil, was our official delegate today. So he was in the room delivering a message from Manitoba and I guess from our country, from many different perspectives. He has a lot of, a long time that he's been doing this, speaking up for residential schools. And so he delivered the letter, and hopefully tomorrow we'll get positive news on the second delegation that will be meeting with the Pope tomorrow.
Phil Fontaine, did the Pope offer an apology? Did he confirm he will come to Canada to make that apology and come to First Nations territory to do it?
Well, first of all, our presentations today weren't based on the notion that the Pope would apologize after we concluded our discussions with him. Our first priority was to make sure that he understood the significance of this issue, both within our community and in particular with the Catholic Church that ran about 80% of the residential schools in Canada. And so it was important to us that he learn as much as he could before issuing an apology on Canadian soil. And that, of course, that's my interest in the matter. I'm hoping that we are convincing enough that the Holy Father will say, yes, I will apologize, and I will meet my commitment to go to Canada to visit with the First Peoples in their territories.
Chief Woodhouse, you touched on the wider meeting which will take place tomorrow. What do you hope to hear from the Pope at that point?
Well, as Phil had said earlier today, that they had given him a full plate, that he has a lot to think about this evening. That the Catholic Church, I'm sure, is, thinking about everything that our residential school survivors had told them, our leaders had told them, explained, what has happened to us over the generations. And I hope they take that seriously and give us positive feedback tomorrow, and that they will come to Canada and apologize to our families.
Mr. Fontaine, you met with Pope Benedict in 2009. You've traveled this road before. You told your story then, but you did not receive an apology back then. But I note the sense of optimism in your comments today, and I'm wondering why you believe this time could be different.
Well, first of all, there's no real comparison with the encounter in 2009 and the encounter with Pope Francis. The biggest difference is the process in 2009 was discreet. It was, all of the discussions were behind closed doors. We weren't involved in the discussions. This particular process that led us to Rome has been very much a public and transparent process. And most importantly, our issues, particularly as they relate to the unmarked graves, the Kamloops situation, shocked Canadians, and it caused this issue to be viewed worldwide. It's as we described it to others that we talked to, the whole world is watching. So it would be very, very difficult for the church to walk back this issue. I think their only real opportunity to bring about reconciliation, including the truths of all of these particular issues, including records, is to issue an apology on Canadian soil. And that's what we expect will happen at some point. I'm not sure that the Pope at the general audience tomorrow, even though he asked.
What are your expectations for tomorrow?
Well, I think the Holy Father will be pretty positive about this encounter. He asked us to give him some time to reflect on all that he heard. And that moment of reflection will occur this evening, and he will speak to the general audience tomorrow. But personally, I don't expect a full apology tomorrow. But
okay.
if there is, wonderful.
Chief Woodhouse, let me finish on you if I can here. If there isn't some clear indication of the Pope's intention to come to Canada, to confirm that tomorrow, and if there isn't some clear intention that an apology is coming, what do you think the consequences of that would be? Would that be viewed as a rejection?
Well, as Chief Fontaine had said, the world is watching. I think it would be very, like he had said, it's very positive up to this point. I want to remain hopeful that we move in a positive way tomorrow, and that we receive positive feedback from him based on all the recommendations that our people have told him today.
All right, I want to thank you both for your time. It's an historic moment here, and we all watch to see what might develop next in that wider audience tomorrow. Phil Fontaine and Chief Woodhouse, thank you both for your time tonight. I really do appreciate it.
Thank you, Peter.
Take care.
To the war in Ukraine now. A delegation of 5 Ukrainian MPs is in Ottawa to thank Canada and to press for more support in the war against Russia. This afternoon they met with the Prime Minister and Deputy Prime Minister and will be meeting with other parliamentarians as well. Also, the Prime Minister today joined other world leaders questioning Russia's continued membership in the G20.
It can't be business as usual to have Vladimir Putin just sitting around the table pretending that everything's okay, because it's not okay and it's his fault.
So far, about 60,000 Ukrainian refugees fleeing the war have applied to come to Canada under the special visitor visa program, but there are calls for Canada to act more quickly to bring more of those refugees to this country and provide them with housing and health services when they get here. There's also continuing criticism over the slow acceptance of Afghan refugees promised passage to this country and who are still waiting. Sean Fraser is Canada's Minister of Immigration. He joins me now from the foyer of the House of Commons this evening. Minister, good to see you again. I'll get to the challenges for Afghan refugees in a moment, but let's begin with efforts to get Ukrainian refugees to Canada. How many of those 60,000 applicants have arrived in this country so far, and what steps are you taking to get more of them here more quickly?
So let me just be specific in my answer here. The particular program that you're speaking about was launched 2 weeks ago to the day, and we declared at the time that it would have a 2-week processing period. So far, of the 60,000 plus that have applied, we've seen more than 12,000 approvals. Those approvals have just come in the last couple of days because there is a 2-week processing period. So we don't have numbers on the arrivals yet because these people would have just been authorized to come to Canada within the last couple of days. We do expect in the days and weeks ahead to see significant numbers of people arrive. I should point out, though, in addition to this particular program, there was the expedited process for the existing visas that were in place before this new program was created, and there was an additional 7,800 people that had been approved through that particular program. Between them and people who may have had the opportunity to come to Canada under a temporary or permanent residency status, we've seen more than 12,000 arrive since the beginning of the year, but the specific number on the program you mentioned will know more in the days and weeks ahead. Okay,
fair enough. There are growing calls to provide those people when they get here with housing and health care. Will you do that?
There's a number of different things that have been in the works for quite some time. In particular, I should point out that on Monday of this week, we announced we'd be extending settlement supports through the 500-plus settlement agencies across Canada. And that focuses more on things like language training, in some instances childcare.
And job searches and so on. What about housing and health care? That's what they say they really need.
So we're working on different options right now. On housing in particular, we're seeing an extraordinary amount of goodwill that there's an outpouring from communities. We're looking at the different options that the government might be able to assist with as well. We'll have more to say once we have an opportunity to figure out how to best coordinate some of those. Okay. We have seen on health, a number of provinces are starting to step out and say they're going to provide them. Quebec in particular was at the front of the pack. I've been having conversations about what role the federal government should have, what role the provincial government have with some of my provincial counterparts. You'll understand, I'm sure, that there's more than just my ministry involved with that. So we have to have a whole of government approach with both the federal and provincial level to see who's best placed to make contributions to which particular services.
One of the big challenges, of course, is transport. Lots of calls for you to get out there, charter airplanes, and start picking these people up in Europe and getting them back to Canada. What's the holdup?
So just to be clear, we are seeing a significant number of people are arriving in Canada, maybe not through the process that is just yielding approvals in the last couple of days, but more than 12,000 since the beginning of the year. On this specific issue of charter travel, one of the challenges that I'll point out that we're trying to wade through right now is the fact that when you're dealing with a normal refugee resettlement effort, you might have hundreds or thousands of people in one place who've already been approved for travel to Canada. In this circumstance, because we stood up a temporary visa process as quickly as possible, after people are approved to come to Canada, they're traveling wherever they can in Europe where they can find safety. We don't necessarily have hundreds or thousands of people sitting in a refugee camp, for example, next to an airstrip that we have access to. It's a really unique nuance to this that makes it more challenging. That said, we're going to continue to work with airlines and partners in the region to understand the best way to facilitate travel for people here, because it's our belief that your ability to take part in the program that's designed for humanitarian reasons shouldn't depend on your income level, for example.
Okay. Look, last night you were in Toronto for the arrival of a flight carrying 300 Afghan nationals, pushing the number of Afghan refugees who've come to Canada since last August. I think the number's up to 10,000 now. Your government promised to bring in 40,000. We saw 100 Afghan interpreters or so who helped support the Canadian military in Afghanistan. They're holding a hunger strike on Parliament Hill, saying your government has been slow to bring over their loved ones. Why is it taking so long to get those refugees to Canada?
So first, let me just address the first portion of your question. It was extraordinary to be on site for the arrival of that cohort of Afghan refugees that does now bring the number to in excess of 10,000. To put that into perspective, I live in the town of New Glasgow, which has a population of a little less than 10,000. To see my entire hometown be comparable to the groups that we've come and given a second lease on life is extraordinary. And I saw families with kids the same age as my kids who are now going to live safely in Canada. On the specific group that you mentioned, we stood up in December a specific immigration stream that's designed specifically to welcome the extended families of previously resettled interpreters. The unique circumstances that make it challenging for the different individuals are unique on a case-by-case basis. For example, one of the challenges that we're seeing, even for the people who found a way to leave Afghanistan and made it into Pakistan, for example, they are now being required to have a valid Afghan passport in order to leave Pakistan. This is not a Government of Canada requirement that's getting in the way, and I think you can appreciate the difficulties of somebody who's facilitated the work of Canada or had their loved ones facilitate the work of Canada being in a tough position to actually get their hands on a valid Afghanistan passport when they have to engage with the Taliban. This characterizes the logistical difficulties that we've seen on Afghanistan from start to finish, but we're not going to waver on our commitment. We're going to continue to work with partners in the region to do what we can to advance these files. We've made a commitment to these families, and I intend to make good on that commitment.
All right. Immigration Minister Sean Fraser. Good of you to spend some time with us tonight, Minister. Good to see you again, and take care.
A pleasure as always. Thank you so much for having me.
I'm joined now by our Thursday panel of political commentators. Geoff Turner is a Liberal commentator, Tim Powers a Conservative commentator, and Danielle Dalzell is an NDP commentator. Good to see you all. Thanks for making time to speak with me today. Geoff, let's start with the government's efforts to bring in more Ukrainian refugees. We heard the Minister of Immigration talking about the challenges of trying to get more Ukrainian refugees and Afghan refugees, for that matter, to Canada. Should this be that complicated, or has Canada overpromised here and underdelivered?
Well, definitely it's an enormous task when you, as you appropriately did, Peter, consider that we have a significant commitment for both Afghans and for Ukrainians now barely 8 months apart from each other. So it certainly is a big processing job. It certainly is a big logistical job. And in finding where those people are and then where they're going is always a challenge. I think the government's been trying to make sure they're kept up to date on this and that they're providing the resources to Citizenship and Immigration Canada to process those applications. But I think, when it comes to refugees who are fleeing war zones and bad situations, it's never fast enough. So I think the government's certainly trying to make it happen as quickly as possible. But Canada is certainly always trying to be the nation out there that is offering safe haven to people fleeing from war zones, and I think that's a commitment that you don't always see in other peer countries. So yeah, we make some big promises, and we definitely want to try to live up to them.
Tim, how do you see this? How's the government handling this refugee crisis?
I think the intentions are noble and the goals are right. The problem is processing, as Geoff alluded to. Even before the war in the Ukraine, they were having trouble getting Afghan people qualified and through and screened accordingly. I'm sure they're trying their best, and I don't know precisely what the problem is. Is it a security screening process? Is it a human resources process issue? Are there other settlement issues that are not being properly tended to? I think we need to push hard to get this right, not compromising security, but I think we really need to look at why things are getting stuck there and find a way to get them unstuck.
Danielle, the minister seems to suggest that, look, part of it is the security requirements. referenced that Canada doesn't seem to be prepared to relax, and part of it is trying to figure out exactly where the refugees are moving to. I think it's some 60,000 who applied to Canada for refugee status here, but they make an application somewhere and then move to a safer area, so it's hard to sort of pinpoint where they are. Are those excuses acceptable, or does Canada need to get this right?
Well, I don't know that they're excuses. I mean, I'm sure there's valid delays, but really there's a great deal of alignment from across parties and a real push to move this quicker. These people need help, particularly people from Ukraine, right away. The NDP has been calling for that, to move quicker and provide them with help when they arrive. It is of the highest urgency possible. So I think a good deal of alignment and just a real call for the government to move as quick as they possibly can to help these people.
Geoff, let me shift the conversation here to carbon taxes. The federal carbon tax price rises April 1st, tomorrow, to $50 a ton from $40. It will jump to $170 a ton by 2030. The Liberals' new climate plan this week includes a proposal to enshrine the pricing in either legislation or in contracts with companies. And I guess I'm wondering whether you think this happens in the next 3 years, now that we have this Liberal NDP agreement. And what will it do to the promises, do you think, from some Conservatives to get rid of the tax if they form government?
Yeah, it's interesting. And just put some of those numbers in context for your viewers, Peter. Of course, when we're talking about a liter of gasoline, so today it's 8.9 cents. Tomorrow it's going to be 11 cents. And in 2030, at that $170 a ton, it'll be 35 cents. So, we've seen gas swing up $1 in the last year. We've seen gas swing up 30, 40, 50 cents in just the last few weeks. So, I think the cost of living is definitely a top concern for people. People are feeling their budget squeezed, but I think those are relatively small amounts compared to what the market and what the international situation has been impacting on us. But either way, in terms of the certainty part of this, I had heard a few weeks ago that there might be some movement around the idea of trying to preserve or to de-risk investment in clean tech and investments that rely on those carbon credits and those high carbon tax rates to be able to make their investments work from a credit perspective. I didn't think the government would bite on that, but they seem to have just indicated in the emissions reduction plan that they will. Governments cannot bind the hands of successor governments legally, but they can certainly make it very expensive and painful for them to get out of something. And that's what the government seems to be trying to do here.
Tim, how should this issue of certainty and predictability affect the debate within the Conservative Party leadership race about the future of a federal carbon tax? Some candidates want to gas it all together, pardon the pun. Others have sort of tweaked plans and so on. But if the government moves ahead with this plan to sort of lock in companies at a price, how does a future government undo that?
Well, I don't think that'll change the trajectory of the Conservative leadership race, Peter. I've never known a debate in the Conservative leadership race or any party's leadership base to be hemmed in by reality. So let's not worry about that right there now. Look, I think this is probably going to be a bit like the GST and the Liberals and their dance with the GST. Mr. Chrétien said he was going to take it down. He didn't, and it stayed because it became a revenue-producing tool for the government, and governments love revenue-producing tools. So Conservatives will score great points rallying against it. Will they change it over time? I doubt it. As it relates to the immediate race, I think you're going to hear more over the next week leading into the budget about immediate inflationary pressure removal tools that the government should be using, whether that be tax holidays or other tax relief measures beyond just the carbon tax. But they will not let it go for the rhetorical purposes, but in reality, I suspect it will stay. Okay.
Danielle, what do you think of this tactic by the Liberals to bring some predictability and some sort of permanence, if you will, to a carbon tax?
Well, I think it's good and it's needed. I mean, we're seeing huge rises in fuel costs, of course, due to the situation in the Ukraine. But to me, that just proves that we need to hasten the transition to sustainable energy sources and seize on the opportunities there. I don't think it's an argument for the carbon tax to go anywhere, but we do need, as Jagmeet Singh has been saying, to be helping with people with cost of living all around. So I don't see it as holding water. I understand why they're seizing this moment, but I think this is an important tool to facilitate that transition because climate change isn't going anywhere and we have to act.
All right, Geoff. Let's Danielle touched on, sort of Tim, on the upcoming budget. Let's go there. More sparring in the House today over the cost of living and the upcoming budget. No matter what's in it, it's going to get a pass thanks to the deal with the NDP. Now, notwithstanding the free hand the government will have here, what does it have to get right in this budget?
Well, I mean, I think there's a lot of different moving pieces. The cost of living is one of those, and the government has chosen to attack that problem through things like childcare and specific targeted measures at populations like seniors and others. Certainly, in terms of that deal with the NDP, things like pharmacare, dental care are also certainly big assistance out in the future for people who rely on those types of services. I think that's one area, and so we'll have to see that. Housing is another big one. I think people are really expecting to see the housing agenda come out here. That includes a mix of affordable housing, but also measures in the private housing market that can cool some of the over speculation or overheating that we're seeing in key markets. I think that's a big one. I also go back to the minister in her fall economic update very clearly said that this budget would contain a sustainable economic growth plan for the next few years. And I think that's a very important piece to make sure that we have in front of us, especially as we talk about the coming out of the pandemic and the significant deficits and costs that we've incurred as a result of that, and as we incur more costs on climate action, that sustainable economic action plan is what will fill in the other side.
Let me jump to Danielle here because of the demands the NDP have made of the government as part of this deal, and what you expect to see in the budget. What does it need to get right, the government in this budget, Danielle, because of what the NDP's asked for?
I mean, first and foremost, in the confidence and supply agreement they signed last week is dental care. I think that's the number one thing the NDP are looking to see, followed by pharmacare and investments in a just climate transition to support people, workers, and communities. So they're really pushing for those pieces. They are outlined in the agreement. And as the agreement states, the Liberals have to move forward on some of these pieces for that to be maintained moving forward. So they're hoping to see that.
All right, let's finish with you, Tim, and what do you think the government needs to get right here?
Well, Peter, I don't want to go all Rachel Harder and start quoting from the Oxford English Dictionary, but I will. Is the word no, the simplest word in the English language, perhaps, and the hardest word for the Prime Minister going to appear anywhere? I think there's a lot of laudable programs, both from the deal with the NDP and things like 2% GDP increase for the military that are there, and perhaps over time all need to be funded. And I think we'll see some of those big ticket items get some money. But I'm interested in seeing what's not going to be funded, the reasons why, and then what taxation powers the government might be looking to extend and increase to pay for some of the current programs that they bring in, because even the revenue from oil and gas that they're trying to wean us off is not going to be enough to pay for a lot of these laudable programs over time. All
right, we get the answers a week from today. Thank you all for your time tonight. Good to see you all again, and take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That's all for another edition of Primetime Politics on CPAC. I'm Peter Van Dusen, from all of us here at CPAC. Thanks for watching. Till next time.